Hello and welcome to Lynher Dairies' little slice of the British Cheese Weekender. We're so pleased to have such great support and warmth for this incredible event, which thanks to Patrick McGuigan, Tracy Colley and John Farrand has just got amazing momentum behind it. So here, as owner of Lynher Dairies Cheese Company and also chair of the Specialist Cheesemakers Association, we're really pleased to be able to reach out to you virtually and to talk to you about cheese and milk and taste cheese and really get behind what we're absolutely passionate about. As you'll be aware, the cheesemakers, specialist cheesemakers in particular, have had quite a challenging 8 weeks, like so many other people, and we have had a situation where our stores have been full of cheese, and we really need to find a way of being able to market direct to you, our loyal customers and consumers, and to be able to extol the virtues and talk directly to our customers. So it is an amazing opportunity and great to be here. So I'm talking ostensibly about Cornish Kern, but before we get to Cornish Kern, I'll tell you a little bit about Lynher Dairies. We started making cheese back in the early 90s and made a cheese called Cornish Yard. Cornish Yard was the invention of a chap called Alan Gray, and for those of you who don't know, Alan Gray used his name, turned it backwards and made Gray into Yarg, and that is the origins of the Yarg name. He found a recipe in a medieval cookbook, and this book defined how you could mature cheese by using the enzymes that are present in stinging nettles. So stinging nettles were used to mature the cheese as a sort of layer of wrap, and so the process of developing Yarg began. Alan Gray found a way to take a stinging nettle and actually adhere it to a cheese so that it became part of an edible rind. Oh, I see to my left, cue massive stinging nettles, because we now are making so much Cornish Yarg that we forage 3 tons of these fantastic stinging nettles. So every year at about this time we're going out onto the farm and the hedgerows looking for stinging nettles. And some of you might be asking the question, because we often get asked, do they keep stinging? And the fact is that if you grasp the nettle, to use this sign like this, it doesn't sting, but you do need to hold it very tight. So we pick these nettles, we put them in a freezer, and we keep them in frozen for 11 months, and then we can apply these to the cheese that you may have seen in your local shops, delicatessens and counters across the country. And we took that cheese, Cornish nettle Yarg, and we did a twist on that by picking wild garlic leaves, and we adhered the wild garlic leaves to form an edible rind, which then gives this very delicate garlic flavour that runs through the cheese. So we now have these 2 cheeses, wild garlic and nettle cheese, and they're both young, they're fresh, they're lactic, they're quite acid, they're open texture, and they change during the season, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we come and introduce you to these girls behind us here. But we had this aspiration to make another cheese, a hard cheese, and we wanted to put that into our, if you like, our stable of cheeses. And so we embarked on inventing a hard Gouda style cheese, and we used some alpine type cultures. So we made a cheese that really hadn't been made before, and it's hard to define as a recipe. We called it Cornish Kern, which is remarkably the word in Celtic for round. Some would say unimaginative, but it sits very happily alongside Yarg. So we now are producers of Yarg and Kern. And producing Kern was a very long process of many batches that failed, and some batches that went extremely well but were very difficult to replicate. But about 4 years ago we started to get a bit of stability into the Kern, and we found that we could get more consistency out of it. And at the point that we did, we entered it into a number of competitions. Cheese competitions in Britain are very popular, but they're also very popular abroad. And in particular, there is one cheese competition, the World Cheese Awards. And to our absolute and total amazement, in 2017, we won Supreme Champion at the World Cheese Awards against mighty competitors from right across 35 or 38, I think it is, countries, 3,500 different cheeses. And the interest that created in the cheese was really hard to realise, and we were absolutely overwhelmed by demand for the cheese. But one of the things that came out as a very clear point was that we needed to get consistency, and to get that consistency we needed to have a very dedicated and specialist supply of milk. So we had an opportunity that came up about a year ago, which was to buy a herd of Ayrshire cows, and these are the cows that are crying out behind us here. And I have here today to talk about with me about the cows is Jonathan, who looks after them. Do you see me, John? So Jonathan is based up here at this fantastic farm. This is his and Eleanor's farm, and has been the home for
about 9 months now.
9 months.
Yeah, we took on the tenancy. It's a Cornwall Council farm, so we took on the tenancy last year in the autumn, and yes, so far enjoying it.
So perhaps, Jonathan, we will go and walk towards the cows so everyone can see what we're talking about here. But
people are having a few problems with the sound, so we need to find shelter.
So, Jonathan, talk to us a little bit about the farm first, and tell us about the acreage and the style of farm we have in Cornwall.
It's a traditional Cornish farm, about 100 acres, predominantly grassland. The soil is reasonably thin above granite, so it suits grass growth, so it holds the moisture in the summer, but it's free draining in the winter as well, so it means that the cows can graze for probably 9 or 10 months of the year without causing a problem. This year was exceptionally bad. It was a long winter, so they were housed for slightly longer, but ordinarily the cows ought to be grazing for 9 or 10 months of the year. Just grazed grass basically. This year we have grown some spring barley, which will be used as a buffer feed to drive the butterfat, and that will complement the grass really nicely.
And so, how do you manage your grass? What's your approach to grass management? How you're thinking about feeding? You've got an electric fence up here, and what's your theory and thinking about the grassland management?
So the cows will have a fresh section twice a day, every day. They'll never go back on to stale pasture, so they'll have a new section twice a day, every day. And that really it's all about intakes. So if you can get the cows eating as much grass as possible, the more protein and energy they can take in. So here in front of us you can see that this is some grass that was grazed very early in the spring and then cut for first cut silage 3 weeks ago, and already, as you can see, there's a nice bit of grass there, and the cows are really enjoying it because it hasn't been fouled. That's pure fresh growth.
And Jonathan, you've got relatively small fields here, and lovely looking sort of thick hedgerows. Do you aim to keep your hedges long, or do you have an approach to hedgerows?
Yeah, so as we all know, everything is being geared more towards the environment side of it now, so hedge trimming will become less and less common. Personally, I like to see large hedges because it provides a nice bit of shelter, so the cows can hide. Those hedges are higher than the cows, so the cows can hide behind and get away from the weather from any direction really. So
We have an amazing vantage up here. We can just about see the sea on the other side, and we can also see the windmills just to our right, which are on the very highest ground. And we have here on the farm a small windmill which is generating how much of your power?
It would be enough to power the dairy sort of 50%, I guess. So yeah, sort of just buying in 50% of the electric, which is, yeah, for a little small turbine is quite efficient.
So on 80% grass with some buffer feed from barley with your own electric, it's a pretty close system, isn't it?
Yeah. So there is a little bit of bought-in feed, but that's about it. You've got to feed cows in the milking parlour to get them to come in and want to come in through the door to be milked twice a day. So they have a little bit of a treat in the parlour, but other than that, it's just grass really.
And what about the managing the seasonality of grass? You know, grass is obviously it's abundant at the moment, but what about at the beginning of the season and the end of the season? What would you do to ensure that the herd is getting a consistent amount?
So keeping it at the right quality is optimum. If they want to eat it, then they'll get the nutrients that they need. Possibly the biggest problem is fouling. So when the cows have grazed it 3-4 times, there's spots where they've mucked. So one way to combat that is to mow it before they go in. So it's all pre-mowed and they have no choice other than to eat all of it, which then sort of leaves a clean slate ready for the next time. When you get into sort of June and July, the grass wants to go to head and seed. When it goes tall and stemmy, the quality deteriorates vastly. So again, mowing is a good way of cutting it off and getting lush regrowth is what we're after.
Yeah. And then to talk about the herd, of course we're biased, but we think they're pretty good looking, don't we? A lovely Ayrshire pedigree herd. Tell us a little bit about the herd and its age and profile, and also the sort of the approach to calving and growing the herd.
Yep, so the cows calve in an all year round pattern, which gives us a level consistency of volume. So in theory it's the same amount of litres every week down to the dairy. And the only way to achieve that is calving in a regular pattern. So I calve about 7 or 8 cows every month, which gives us the volume we need. The cows average about 6,000 litres per lactation. So the lactation lasts for 300 days, and then they have 60 days holiday where they go off away from the milking herd and rest before they do it all again. We've got a cow here, this cow in the middle of the frame. She's had 9 calves and is still looking pretty fit. There's some younger cows there. The average lactation of the cow here is 6, but I have got some that have had 12 calves. But at any more than 12, then they're starting to get pretty rickety. So that's about the end of it.
And typically the Ayrshire herd has very good fat and protein.
Yeah, so I'm under the understanding that it's the ratio of fat to protein that we need. The herd average would be about 4.7 fat and 3.6 protein, which is just what you need, I gather.
Well, it produces fantastic cheese, and the ratio of fat to protein is always in balance, and that means that we can get a good-bodied cheese that matures well, but also really flavoursome milk. And the fact that they are grazed cows really does fundamentally improve and affect the milk that we have throughout the year. So looking at this herd, talk a little bit about the benefit of a small herd versus a bigger herd, because this is now, by current standards, a very small herd.
Yeah, so I think in terms of management, the smallest herd is much easier because you can get them out and grazing you can extend the season, because you can't drive 300 or 400 cows through a small gateway, whereas 50 cows can walk through, they don't make a mess, and they just go out and eat. So they're not making mud on the sort of early part of the season and right at the end. So it enables the cows to go out, and they can all shelter under the hedgerows if they need to, whereas large herds perhaps can't do that as well. Obviously it is possible, it just doesn't work as well. The idea is to not make mud if we can possibly help it.
Absolutely. Well, I think we should go and try some of the cheese that these cows produce and talk a little bit more about cheese.
So I think we're just going to try some of the famous Kern cheese now. Oh, they're an inquisitive sort, aren't they?
Right.
So,
Most people are asking if they can come and live on the farm.
how many people have you got room for?
Yeah.
Well, more than we currently have at the moment. Yeah, it's a shame. We do have some self-catering cottages as well, which obviously have no guests for the foreseeable future with the lockdown restrictions. So yeah, plenty of space, but just not at the moment.
Jonathan Tash says very happy cows, they look in good condition. More people want to live on your farm. Cows on holiday, I love it. From where? We're in Stivians, in southwest Cornwall. Loving the event and seeing the home of Yarg. I wish we're in the countryside now. There's got some more bookings coming through. I think 80% of the country is dreaming of going on holiday there right now.
Well, as soon as we have lockdown restrictions removed, gosh, we'll be pleased to see everybody, because we really do want to be able to welcome visitors back to Cornwall and to come and stay in our cottages and holiday accommodation and to come and eat cheese. So Cornish Kern is, we make this cheese as a 4.5 kilo wheel. The size of it's important because it enables us to be able to get the depth that we need to mature it over time, so that it doesn't go too hard, but we don't want it so deep that it holds moisture. So it's quite a difficult and delicate balance. When we're grading cheese, we start by looking at it and looking at the form and the texture and the mould. And you see, we would describe this as having a very close paste. So the curd is very tight, and that curd is holding a reasonable amount of moisture. But as it gets older, it will be losing its moisture here through the rind. So it's just gently drying out, and this moisture balance is absolutely key for getting the cheese to the right point. But because we are a seasonally produced cheese, and because sometimes cheese holds more moisture, sometimes we have cheese that accelerates quite quickly and we mature it to maybe 1 year or even 14 months. And other cheeses we actually hold on to for quite a long period of time, even upwards of 2 years. And we're tasting some cheese in the dairy at the moment, which is nearly 3 years old, and it's still tasting really good. But all of this will hinge on how much moisture is being retained in the cheese from the outset. And that goes right back to the milk. So when we're looking at our cheese and we're trying to decide when to release it, we take a boar. And in the immortal words of Blue Peter, this is one I did earlier. And this boar we're looking for a nice clean boar. So we look at this is something we call a cheese iron, and we bore with the cheese iron like this. and then we pull out a plug, and we're looking for something that's really smooth and really clean, and it's not leaving a fat deposit, and it breaks cleanly but not crumbly. And we're then looking for it to hold volume, to have substance to it, not to be a sort of flaky, friable curd. So we kind of push it around in our fingers. And then what we're looking to do next is to try and taste the cheese with our nose. And as we do that, we tip our head back a little bit, and we really try and get a good, strong whiff of cheese to kind of work out what it's going to taste like. And you get all that flavour that goes through the nose to the back of the palate. And you're really trying to kind of work out what you're expecting from the cheese, how it's likely to taste. And then we take it one stage further, and we maybe break a piece here. Now, for those of you who have Kern to taste, what we're looking for is a bit of a break, like so, a nice clean break. And we're looking for a very deep, profound cheesiness. So it to be quite savoury at the first, and then to last, and as it lasts, and as it gets to the end of the mouthfeel, we're looking for a little tiny bit of sweetness. So,
what type of starter culture are you using for this cheese?
we use the same kind of starters that we have in Alpine cheeses, like the Gruyères and the Emmentaler. So it's a version of that, but we make it with a Gouda recipe, and that means to say we wash the curd part way through. We take out some of the whey, we dispose of the whey, and we bring in water. And as we bring in the water, that slows the acidity to give a very calm acidity, and we've brought it up to heat to get some of these starter cultures that the Alpine cheesemakers are using. So it's a really interesting kind of fusion, hate the word really, but it's a really interesting bringing together of two styles of cheese to produce its own thing.
And another one, as we're going, from Paxton and Whitfield. What's your favourite drinks pairing for Kern and Yarg?
So for Yarg, I really like ciders and beers. I like the sort of the kind of some of the sweetness that you can get through ciders and beers to offset. With Kern, you can really start thinking about some good robust red wines, some really sort of intense red wines, because it's a robust cheese, and it stands having a kind of good strong red wine, or even a port, you know, is really good, or you know, a Madeira. So we quite often like a bit of honey on with Kern. It goes well with honey, and where Yarg we like with more fruit, sort of pears and maybe fresh plums and apricots. You can put sort of dried figs and, you know, dried fruits with Kern because of the intensity of that cheese flavour. Any more questions coming through?
Not at the moment.
It's great having questions. Anyone who's out there wants to throw a question. I like the questions. So we're getting a very different taste profile on the grading with Kern, and whilst we set parameters, we recognise that it has variation within those parameters. So for example, sometimes we get a bit more sweetness from the milk, other times we get a little bit more savoury. And this cheese that we're tasting at the moment, that's going through and we're dispatching at the moment, is very, very savoury. It's got masses of length of cheesiness about it, and it is not pinging out those very sweet fudgy flavours. Sometimes we can get a real fudginess in the cheese, but it's not so present in this one at the moment, although there is that little sweetness.
Cheryl would like to know if mead would go well.
I think mead would go well, yes. Great name, isn't it? Yeah, I think mead would go well. I think anything with Kern with the sweetness is really, you know, it can withstand sort of stickiness and sweetness. With Yarg, we cook with Yarg a lot because it's got a very low melting point, so it's fab when you put it on sliced potatoes or on other vegetables and then just stick it under the grill. You've just got instant you know, sort of uplift on a vegetable. With the Kern, its melting point is much higher, and it's a nice cheese to grate and to use on your on the salad or into the pastas and things like that. So you take it more slightly in the route that you would take a Parmesan or a Pecorino, those kinds of cheeses, because it is lower moisture and therefore doesn't melt quite as quickly.
And another question from John. Can you talk about the rind? Can you eat it?
Whilst we advocate and encourage everyone to eat the rind of a nettle or a garlic yard, because we've spent a lot of time picking these guys, don't they flop quickly? We've spent a lot of time picking these guys and putting them onto cheese to form an edible rind. This is not an edible rind. This is a coating that a number of us use as cheesemakers, and is typically used in the Dutch cheeses. It's permeable, and as you can see, it peels here. So under here we have the natural mould of the cheese, and that's developing in our stores. But we keep this permeable rind, which is, I guess you'd say, it's akin to putting an old-fashioned cloth over the muslin cloth that gets used on, for example, the traditional cheddars. So this forms a rind, but it's completely breathable. So we're getting it. It is still a mould-ripened cheese, but no, I wouldn't eat it, John. I would definitely discard that rind.
And we also asked, what's your plan to dabble with bees?
The plan to dabble with bees would be great, wouldn't it? And I mean, gosh, we all need bees in the countryside, and we should all be trying to dabble with bees if we possibly can, for pollination purposes and ensuring our own terroir and diversity and is encouraged. So at the dairy itself, bees might be quite challenging in the dairy. I think we might have problems there, but maybe we could dabble with bees. Nice suggestion. I like the idea.
Yeah. And just to clarify with John there, who said, impressed that you produce your own starter culture, that might be a slight miss.
No, we don't. We don't actually use we mix our own cultures that come to us from either France or Switzerland. So we mix different starter cultures. We don't at the moment, and it is something that's work in progress, and we do discuss at a regular basis. We don't actually propagate our own starter cultures right now.
Jerry's just nursing a bee sting on his eyelid, so we might need to watch out for that. Can you cook with Kern? What are your cooking suggestions?
So cooking, I would use it grated, salads, on vegetables, and I would use it as I would think more with Kern. I tend to put more accompaniments with it rather than cooking with it. We've got escaping cows behind us.
They return.
They're very friendly cows, and they do love cheese. Whenever we produce cheese near them, they will come and follow cheese. So that's the grading process on cheese. We normally grade out about 60 batches at a time. So we'll have a group of 6 or 7 of us together. We'll taste out 60 batches. It's a long session, and we will give those grading scores, and we will do that against what we call our organoleptic profile. So organoleptic is aroma, texture, taste, and we will be looking to see what's ready to go today, what's ready to go in 3 months' time, and what we maybe want to put back and regrade for 6 months or even a year's time. And some we put into the naughty corner and slightly despair of, but don't give up on.
And another question from Peter. How old are the cheeses when they're at their absolute best, and do they keep well?
So, in answer to the second part of your question, Kern keeps really well. So that's a cheese that we can keep going and going with, and sometimes it improves, sometimes it just changes, but in any event it keeps well. We've had some cheeses that have been absolutely at their best at 14 months, and we've released them quickly. Others we've literally kept until they're 2 to 2.5 years old, and felt that they really benefited the extra time in the maturing stores. They just take on a different kind of complexity and a different kind of flavour. So where a younger Kern is perhaps a little bit more juicy, a little bit more unctuous, it's got a bit more lactic notes are coming through, the 2.5-year Kern becomes very, very much more intensely savoury. But you know, they're slightly different, but they're both, you know, they have their own merits, and we work accordingly.
And what about if you were buying cheese and you were thinking about keeping it and using it?
If you were buying cheese to keep, and if you really want to keep cheese, personally I advocate eating it as quickly as you can. But if you really want to keep cheese, try and buy, if you can, maybe a whole cheese and then slice off it. But if you're buying a piece of cheese, so say you buy a quarter of Kern, I would wrap it in greaseproof paper if you possibly can, and wrap it quite tight, and maybe put it then in a cold place. I mean, few of us have pantries these days, but in an ideal world you'd keep the cheese at around 8 degrees. You wouldn't have it going much colder. So if you run your fridge very, very cold, perhaps put it into some kind of container to protect it from getting very, very cold. The problem with keeping cheese too cold is once it's cut, it does have a propensity to dry out, and that's a shame really. But we've been working with Beeswax Wraps, you know, the kind that we're seeing in a number of shops at the moment as alternatives to cling film and tinfoil, and we find they keep cheese really beautifully. So the wax is just giving it a nice kind of coating without it drying up or becoming too sweaty. So that's a good option. And if you are interested in Beeswax Wax, we do have them on our online shop.
Okay, I'm going to get another question in. If you only had one wedge left in the world, which would it be?
Oh,
I guess that can be one that's not yours.
that's such a question, isn't it? Aren't we lucky that we have so much diversity of cheese? But I guess if I had one wedge left in the world, it would have to be Yarg. You know, a wedge of Yarg. I've put so much of my life into Yarg and developing Yarg and making Yarg, and I'm passionate about Yarg still, and I absolutely love its variation and variety. So I probably would buy a wedge of Yarg as my last one, but Kern would sit very close to it.
And what made you start making cheese?
I moved to Cornwall, and I was doing some work with a couple of farmers up on Bodmin Moor. We were looking at local food and local cheese production in particular, and I worked with them for a number of years, thinking about developing their business and developing their cheese, which at the time was in a very sort of limited volume production. And we worked together for a few years on a fairly sort of experimental basis to start with, and as we kept building it, we decided then to build another site and to grow the business. Time was right, people were right, we were all in the right place.
Yeah.
I think at the moment, I imagine we're coming near to end of time.
Yep, I think we are.
And one of the things I would just like to give a big plug for is to go onto the Specialist Cheesemakers Association website, and you will, on going onto that site, you will land straight on an interactive map, and that will tell you where all the cheesemakers that are selling cheese online, and also the retailers that are selling cheese online. So it gives opportunity to really buy and try masses and masses of different cheeses. I think, if I'm right in remembering, there are 120 cheesemakers who are selling direct to us as the public, and there are a significant number of cheesemongers, cheese specialists, who you can contact, get in touch with, ask your questions of, seek recommendations for, and buy cheese regularly. And through this last 8 weeks, we've all really been very enthused and encouraged by that ability to have conversations and to be able to talk about cheese and to be able to tell our stories. So please go onto the Specialist Cheesemakers Association website, have a look at the map, and talk to other cheesemakers as well.
They've asked us to share the link here. I'm not sure how to do that.
I think
but we'll try and do it afterwards.
we can try and do it afterwards, but I think if you just go Specialist Cheesemakers Association, it should land you straight there. I hope. But I'm not the techie person.
Cool. Well, I think that's
Is that it
it.
for today? Thank you all for joining. It's great to have your questions. It's really, really great to have your support. We really appreciate it, all of us. And keep enjoying the weekend. Tune into more talks and eat lots and lots and lots of cheese. Thanks a million.
Just got to work out how to end it.